While the group of 7 countries in the previous US administration under President Joe Biden imposed economic sanctions on Russia that looked heavy shortly after the 2022 full scale invasion of Ukraine, they included significant carve-outs aimed at not disrupting too much the global energy markets. After a contraction in 2022, aggressive defense spending contributed to Russia's economic growth for the past 2 years, suggesting the effects of the sanctions has reduced after Russia's economy adjusted and discovered workarounds. Sanctions are the best leverage we have, said Edward Fishman, a senior research scholar at Columbia University Center on Global Energy Policy and author of the forthcoming book, Choke Points: American Power in the Age of Economic Warfare. But Russia's economy is now showing cracks, said Fishman, and in the last 10 days of the Biden administration, the US imposed pretty significant sanctions on Russia's oil and gas sector that meaningfully enhanced the pressure on Russia's economy. The last-minute sanctions from the outgoing administrations are likely intended to provide Trump with a strong negotiating hand in future talks. The new sanctions close many of the energy loopholes and could reduce Russian oil exports by between 500,000 and 1,000,000 barrels per day in the short term. Only days after US President Donald Trump returned to the White House, he dialed up the heat on Russia with threats of sanctions, more sanctions, tariffs, and negotiating the hard way, as he said, if Russian Tsar fails to come to the table for a peace deal with Ukraine. Trump has repeatedly promised to push for a swift peace settlement once in office, prompting fears for some that he might pressure Kyiv towards painful concessions or, at worst, what would amount to a surrender. His recent actions, however, suggest the opposite, that Trump could be ready to take a hard line with Russia.
If a deal is not reached, I will have no other choice but to put high levels of taxes, tariffs and sanctions on anything being sold by Russia to the United States and other participating countries. Donald Trump, the President of the United States of America.
Take a look at that face you're about to see now. Take a good look at it and you will grasp the meaning of the saying, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. He, the Russian Tsar, who amended Russian constitution as per his Tsaric needs and started his own war because Ukrainians are Nazis, or they abused Russian language, or they do not want to give up on their lands just because Putin calls these lands his own, and they fight back, you name the pretext. But the fact is, Putin is a usurped Russian Tsar indicted by ICC for a forced deportation of 20,000 of Ukrainian children. Now take a look at that face and tell me, do you believe he will negotiate a deal? He does not even speak the negotiation language. And then, all of a sudden, comes someone else. Someone who finally brings to the table a proposition in a language that Putin clearly understands. As just as all the thugs do, he himself, Putin, talks solely that language, the language of force. Like or dislike Donald Trump, all you like, but both of his terms were the result of democratic elections. To good or bad, that we yet to discover, but these were elections. While in Russia it is what it always is in Russia, the full, concrete and absolute absence of any choice, which is interpreted by the Russian nation as a blessing from above, since Russians fear nothing more than freedom of choice. They are not used to that language of making any choices. They always, by centuries, have been forced to it. During the Soviet time, and even the crumbling of the Soviet regime itself was a forced event. They did not have to do anything else but obey the prevailing force. All Russians have learned in centuries is to do exactly that. And that is what they choose. Putin. He never took any free choice from Russia. There never was one. And so Donald Trump is talking to Putin and his no-choice nation in a language that they do understand genetically perfect. It is my way or my way anyway, just the hard way. Regardless of how Trump chooses to Will the military and economic leverage available to him, Trump will need to use diplomacy to bring Putin to the negotiating table and secure a peace deal. Any diplomatic maneuvering will need to not just include Ukraine and Russia, but to take their allies into consideration. How exactly, you might ask? Well, take a good look at Olaf Scholz of Germany and do exactly the opposite.